What would you do if the sun vanished for 14 hours, and your home had no heat, no light, no insulation, just darkness, cold, and silence? One by one, the lights fail. Neon signs blink out, elevators halt, mid-flight, and then nothing. Just a low hum fading into blackness. Phones lose signal, conversations stop. A kind of silence settles that no city has heard in centuries. That silence once ruled every winter night. Today, we fight the cold with a swipe. Thermostats, heated blankets, streaming distractions. But not long ago, winter was a force with teeth. In a medieval village, wind needled through wooden shutters and down stone walls. A single fire, smoky, temperamental, had to warm the living, dry clothes, cook meals, and ward off frost. Children huddled close, layered in scratchy wool, their breath visible in the firelight. The dark wasn't just around them, it pressed inward, yet somehow they not only survived, they found warmth, meaning, and even joy. This is not a tale of suffering. This is a story of survival. Block by block, power drains from a modern skyline until only the stars remain. And beneath that same sky, a cottage stands, its fire barely glowing. Inside, a mother adjusts a log. The embers glow, tracing her face as her child stirs in layered cloth. This is the medieval mind. This is anthropology. You are here now, not just to observe what they endured, but to understand what they knew. The wind tears across the roofline, rattling the shutters of a small timber cottage on the outskirts of Toulouse. Snow cakes the crooked slats, clings to the eaves. Inside, the door creaks open, letting in a rush of cold air and a burst of howling wind before it thuds shut again. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, muffled by the snowdrifts. Orange light leaks through the seams of the wood, just enough to mark the shape of shelter. Agnes is already at the hearth. She kneels with practiced precision, the muscles of her back hunched close to the coals. Her hands move instinctively, scooping yesterday's ash, layering it gently over a smoldering ember to preserve its heat through the night. The bitter smoke stings her eyes, but she doesn't flinch. Her palms are red, dry, slightly cracked, but steady. This fire is not just warmth, it is the memory of every winter before. Martin appears in the doorway, outlined by snow and dusk. His wool cloak is dusted in white, hands raw from axe work. He says nothing at first, just steps in, nods once to Agnes, and drops a bundle of damp firewood onto the floor. His breath fogs the air as he exhales, shoulders slumping. She meets his eyes briefly, no smile, just understanding, and turns back to tend the flames. On the mattress near the wall, their children sleep in a heap. 4 bodies swaddled in linen, old wool, and stitched together scraps of cloth. Their breathing is slow, shallow. A few curls of breath rise into the air like mist. There is no privacy in this room, but there is safety, a warmth drawn not from space, but from closeness. The hearth sits at the center of the room, and the center of the family is life. Most medieval homes were built around it, the design centering not on privacy or style but on survival. A 14th century inventory from a nearby village records simply, La foudoit vivra chaque nuit. The fire must live each night. Without it, water would freeze in the bucket, illness would seep in, and food would not keep. This was the boundary between life and death, lit one ember at a time. Agnes leans closer to the children and murmurs something low, inaudible. Martin, now seated, cups his hands near the flame, rubbing warmth into his palms. This isn't comfort as we know it, but it is enough. In the dark, in the cold, they remain close. A man lies flat on his back in a dark apartment, his face washed in the pale blue glow of his phone screen. It's 2:03 a.m. The room is silent, except for the low hum of the central heating and the soft bars of distant traffic. He scrolls through news, messages, videos, none of it landing. His eyes are dry, bloodshot. He's exhausted, but nowhere near sleep. Everything is tuned to comfort. The room holds steady at 21 degrees Celsius. The mattress is engineered for spinal support. Noise is minimized. Light is dimmed, but still, his mind races. His body remains still under clean sheets, but his thoughts don't quiet. The comfort is constant, even optimized, yet there is no rest. 6 centuries earlier, in a cottage near Toulouse, Agnes sleeps in wool layers beside a slowly fading fire. The air inside is cold enough to see your breath. Her children are pressed close beside her on a straw mattress. The room is drafty, but still, no shifting, no flickering screens, just breath, sleep, and the quiet hum of survival in a split frame. He flips his pillow, restless. She exhales slowly, already deep in sleep. Sleep disorders have increased by more than 70% in recent decades. According to data from the CDC and sleep studies from Harvard Medical School, researchers, like Dr. Matthew Walker, point to a combination of factors: excessive light exposure at night, digital stimulation, social isolation, and irregular sleep timing. Modern life has unmoored us from the cues that used to govern sleep. The rhythms once set by sun and fire have been replaced by backlit devices and 24-hour access. Winter sharpens this divide. Rates of seasonal affective disorder rise significantly in colder months. Anxiety spikes, even when homes are warm and food is abundant. The National Institutes of Health reports that nearly 1 in 5 adults now experiences a mood disorder intensified by the winter season. Despite better lighting and temperature control, we lack the social synchrony that once helped entire households face the dark together. The man glances to the side. The second pillow beside him is empty. There's no fire, no sound, except the heater. He is not cold, but he is alone. The room is safe, efficient, and silent. Still, he can't sleep. Not because of what's outside, but because of what's missing. Warmth, in the past, had to be earned. It was tended, shared, preserved. Agnes kept the coals alive for her family. Martin carried wood to feed the flame. Today, warmth comes at the push of a button, but often, it lacks the meaning that once made it matter. They had less, but they felt more. What if our ancestors knew something we've forgotten, something we've buried beneath drywall and deadlines? What if our ancestors knew something we've forgotten? Not a secret, not a miracle, just a different way of living, something we've buried beneath drywall and deadlines. Today, we insulate, regulate, and automate our homes against the cold. But what if survival once meant something deeper? Not just staying alive, but understanding the season itself. The quiet, the slowness, the need for one another. The ticking of a wall clock gives way to the subtle crackle of fire, and a hallway lined with framed prints becomes a timber-framed room lit by embers. Medieval peasants didn't beat winter. They didn't conquer frost or outsmart the night. They shaped their lives to move with it. Darkness wasn't an inconvenience. It was part of the rhythm. Days were short, labor shifted inward, and households gathered close. Survival came not from resistance, but from alignment. Meals followed the light. Sleep followed the cold. They slowed down because nature did. This isn't a chronicle of hardship. It's a blueprint. Physical, psychological, and spiritual. A way of living through winter that wasn't about enduring, but adapting. Over the next 90 minutes, We'll explore how they kept warm at night without insulation or electricity, how entire households organized time and labor when days lasted just 8 hours, and how rituals of faith, of folklore, of simple repetition protected the mind when the world turned quiet and dark. Not just how they survived the cold, but how they lived within it. We'll follow 3 threads: fire, structure, and belief. First, the techniques they used to preserve and share heat, not just in the hearth, but in the design of their homes and the ways they slept. Then, the daily structures shaped by the season itself: meals at dusk, sleep that came in 2 distinct phases, work that fit the daylight, and finally, belief in saints, symbols, and solstice rites, not as superstition, but as tools to organize meaning in long, dark months. This isn't just their story, it's a mirror. In understanding their winter, we ask new questions about our own. What might we learn from a world where time moved differently, where warmth was earned, not automated, where the nights were shared, not silenced? As frost creeps across a medieval window pane and fades into the sealed glass of a modern one, we return to that central idea. They had less, but they knew the season. By the early 1300s, Europe was entering a climatic shift now known as the Little Ice Age. Average temperature dropped by as much as 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, a margin that, over time, reshaped survival. Ice core samples from Greenland and tree-earing data across northern Europe confirm shortened growing seasons and increased frost events. Harvest records from medieval monastic estates document grape harvests delayed by weeks and grain yields falling sharply. In one English almanac, from 1315, a monk writes simply, "The fields have failed us again." Cold wasn't a single event. It was a steady encroachment, transforming the background conditions of daily life. Rivers froze, livestock perished, and what once was seasonal hardship became a constant variable. To survive, peasants didn't resist the cold. They redesigned life around it. The structures they built reflected that shift. Across Europe, from the long houses of Scandinavia to door-band wattle cottages in Britain and single-room timber dwellings in France, homes were designed less for aesthetics than function. Roofs sloped to shed snow. Ceilings stayed low to trap heat. In many cases, animals were brought indoors during winter, not out of sentiment, but necessity. Livestock gave off warmth, and their body heat helped raise the temperature of shared living spaces. Insulation was improvised with what was at hand: straw, moss, scraps of fabric, even packed earth. Architecture became an extension of the body, layered, shielded, breathing. At the center of it all was the heart. More than a heat source, it was the nucleus of daily life. For cooking, drying clothes, preparing remedies, and gathering, the hearth often sat in the middle of the home, not tucked away, and was never left unattended. Ethnographic studies of alpine communities into the 19th century show striking continuity with medieval fire practices: careful tending, fire banking, and designated firekeepers within the household. The hearth's stones were blackened from years of use. The surrounding walls bore a permanent coat of soot. Heat was not incidental. It was curated. Sleep reflected the same adaptation. In cramped cottages, families shared beds, not as an emergency measure, but as standard practice. One 14th-century chronicler observed, "They slept like wolves, curled tight and many together." The practice reduced surface area exposure and preserved body heat. Beds were low to the ground and filled with straw, often spread directly across the floor. Layers of wool, linen, and furs formed shared covers. Children, the elderly, and infants were placed toward the center, where heat concentrated. Sleep itself came in two parts. Known today as segmented or biphasic sleep, medieval nights were often divided into first sleep and second sleep, separated by an hour or more of wakefulness. Monastic schedules incorporated this rhythm, with midnight prayers timed accordingly. In peasant homes, that period between sleeps was often used for storytelling, quiet chores, or even moments of intimacy. Historian Roger Eckert's analysis of diaries and legal records shows references to the watch, an accepted and anticipated part of the night, not a symptom of insomnia, but a feature of human rest before artificial light. Fire management was a science in itself. To preserve embers overnight, peasants used a method called banking, covering coals with ash to reduce oxygen flow and let them smolder slowly. This technique maintained enough heat to restart the fire at dawn without new kindling. In regions where wood was scarce, like parts of Ireland or the Scottish Highlands, families used peat or charcoal, materials that burned slowly and emitted consistent heat. Banking was more than convenience. It was a form of thermal planning, passed down through generations. In effect, it was low-tech heat storage. Smoke wasn't just a nuisance, it was part of the system. Chimneys were rare before the late Middle Ages, so smoke accumulated beneath the rafters, where it helped dry wood, cure meat, and even act as a rudimentary pest control. But to offset the respiratory burden, people added aromatic herbs to the fire. Mugwort, pine needles, rosemary, and juniper were burned, not just for their scent, but for their believed medicinal effects. Some eased coughing, others were thought to ward off illness or damp spirits. These practices, combining comfort with function, offered a sensory layer to the winter routine. Food became another axis of adaptation. In winter, diets shifted toward calorie-dense, heat-retaining meals, root vegetables, preserved meats, fatty broths. Before bed, many families consumed hot stews or porridges to raise internal temperature. Fats, especially lard and butter, supported thermogenesis, the body's ability to generate heat from digestion. Meat was often salted or smoked in advance. Vegetables like turnips, leeks, and onions stored as these were not indulgent meals, but purposeful. Warmth began from the inside out. Clothing extended this principle. Sleepwear wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. Linen undergarments helped wick moisture, a key defense against chill, as damp fabric could become lethal. Over these, wool layers provided insulation, sleeping caps covered the head, where heat loss is significant, and mittens or hand wraps kept fingers from stiffening. Dressing for bed was a deliberate act, often assisted by others in the household. For children and elders, it became a quiet ritual of care, a moment of physical connection in a season where cold could feel isolating. In all of this, shelter, fire, food, and sleep, one theme repeats: adaptation. Medieval Europeans didn't endure winter passively. They created layered responses that were physical, social, and symbolic. Their systems evolved from necessity, refined by experience. Warmth was not just a matter of degrees. It was a network of practices, rooted in rhythm, shared knowledge, and embodied tradition. They didn't conquer the cold. They moved with it. And this adaptation was cultural as much as practical. Manuscripts from the 14th century include blessings to be said before lighting a fire. Winter saints, like Saint Blaise and Saint Brigid, were invoked for health and protection. Homes were marked with charms to guard against the cold humors. These were not superstitions in the modern sense, but strategies, ways to frame risk, maintain morale, and sustain meaning when daylight waned. As we zoom out from a flickering hearth to the snow-covered fields beyond, we glimpse the full system at work. Winter wasn't something to get through. It was something to live with and to learn from. Agnes wakes before the sun rises. The cottage is silent but not still. Cold air presses in through the walls, and her first movement is toward the hearth. She doesn't speak. She kneels with practiced hands. She scrapes back the ash to find the ember she banked the night before. A faint orange pulse responds. She cups it gently with dried twigs and a breath of air. The ember catches, the fire lives, her breath fogs as she leans back, rubbing her hands. In a home with no clock, this is the first duty, not measured in minutes, but in warmth returned. Breakfast is sparse but necessary. A bit of broth, carried over from the night before, is heated to a low simmer. Hard bread is torn and dropped into the bowl, soft by heat. The broth smells of garlic, marrow, and root vegetables. It's not indulgent, it's functional. The warmth spreads from the belly outward. Agnes eats slowly, seated near the hearth. The others wake one by one, and bowls are passed hand to hand. After eating, they kneel. Brief prayers are said aloud, a mixture of Latin phrases and local dialect, simple thanks and quiet hopes. Then Agnes steps outside to check the animals. The air is sharp. Chickens cluck from beneath the straw, and the goat shifts slightly in its corner stall. These animals aren't separate from the household. They share the shelter. Their warmth is part of the system. She checks water, adjusts bedding. The day has begun. By late morning, light filters weakly through the single small window. It's enough for close work. Barely. Agnes sits near the light and begins to spin wool. The fibers are coarse but familiar. She works slowly, with care, turning wool into thread with the help of a hand spindle. Nearby, a sleeve torn days ago is finally patched. The rhythm is slow, dictated by daylight. The light defines what can be done, and how long she has to do it. Children carry their own tasks. One grinds grain with a stone quern, rhythmically turning the handle. Another sweeps the floor with a bundled reed broom. Water must be hauled from the nearby stream, and a small wooden bucket is balanced between two hands. These jobs are real contributions. Play and work blend together, not neatly separated. Childhood here is not idle. It's participatory. By midday, tasks pause. The fire is fed again, and the family drifts toward the hearth. Someone hums softly. One of the children curls up near the fire. Agnes ladles a bit of broth from the pot. Warm, familiar, sustaining. Outside, the wind whistles against the walls. But inside, the house holds. The fire is steady. Time softens. By late afternoon, shadows stretch across the dirt floor. Oil lamps are rarely used. They're expensive, and light is rationed. As Agnes closes the shutter, the house grows dim. There is no rush to do more. The day yields to the dark naturally. In winter, time contracts. Activity slows not from laziness but alignment. This is how the body follows the season. As the darkness settles in, Gunnar, the village elder, arrives. He is wrapped in thick wool and walks with a carved stick. He lowers himself near the hearth, his hands open to the fire. The children gather close. He speaks slowly, spinning stories of saints, animals who spoke in the forest, and winters long past. His voice rises and falls with ease, the firelight shaping his face. This is not entertainment. It's transmission, memory passed aloud. Dinner is stew, thick with beans, barley, garlic, and what little meat remains from the salted stores. Weak ale is poured into rough ceramic cups. Steam rises from the bowls. It smells earthy and sharp. They eat with hands and wooden spoons. The firelight reflects in the broth's surface. No one rushes. The heat from the meal is as important as its flavor. Nourishment is communal. Each body warmed feeds the whole room. By 6:30, they lie down. The straw mattress is spread across most of the floor. Layers of wool, linen, and patched cloth form a barrier against the cold. The family presses close, bodies forming one long shape beneath the covers. This is the first sleep, a pattern well documented by historians. Deep and heavy, this sleep lasts several hours, uninterrupted by artificial light or sound. The fire dims. The room breathes as one. Outside, wind moves through bare branches. Later, sometime past midnight, comes the wakeful watch. Agnes stirs. She doesn't rise all the way, just sits near the fire and adds a few sticks. She kneels and prays in silence. Martin, already awake, carves a wooden spoon. His hands move with muscle memory, shaving curls that fall into a small pile. Sometimes they speak in whispers, sometimes they don't. This is a space for thought, for presence. Many used this time for devotion, some for quiet intimacy. It wasn't interruption. It was built into the night. Around 2 or 3 a.m., the second sleep begins. It's lighter, often filled with dreams. Some stir again, some do not. There's no alarm, only the slow approach of dawn. A faint light begins to grow beyond the shutter. A rooster crows. The window pane is misted with frost, but the fire has held through the night. Sleep, once segmented and sacred, was not broken. It was whole, in 2 pieces. In the modern world, stillness often reads as failure. Empty time to be filled, optimized, managed. But in the medieval mind, winter's quiet was sacred. Stillness was not absence, it was presence. Monasteries across Europe, guided by the rule of Saint Benedict, observed extended silence in the colder months, allowing reflection to deepen. A monk walks barefoot across a frost-lined cloister, breath visible in the dim light. The wind moves softly through stone arches. No one speaks. The season invited contemplation, not complaint. This was not inactivity. It was intentional pause. Waiting wasn't weakness, it was strength. Patience, in a winter context, was a virtue learned through necessity. Weather couldn't be forced, food couldn't be rushed. Frost had to thaw on its own time. To endure was to hold one's ground with dignity. A woman sits by the shuttered window, her hands resting. She is not idle, she is enduring. As one medieval proverb put it, "He who hurries the sun wastes his firewood." There was honor in letting time unfold. Winter also shaped the inner world. Stillness wasn't empty, it was full of prayer, of memory, of dreams. Monks kept vigil at night. Minds turned inward as candles flickered beside them. Households, too, sat quietly in the dark, firelight casting long shadows. These weren't moments of waiting for spring. They were their own season of thought. In a village ledger, a scribe notes a month of soul-keeping, not metaphor, but instruction. In winter, you tended the body and the spirit equally. Spiritual life also extended to what was invisible. In many regions, cold was thought to invite presences. Not all of them welcome. Folklore from Brittany to the Carpathians described frost spirits, winter wraiths, or silent figures who passed by the window when the wind howled. To ward them off, families left bread at thresholds, ash patterns near doors, or bits of wool on tree branches. A child slips a crust of bread onto the sill. Frost creeps across the glass. This wasn't fear, it was etiquette. The cold, like all guests, had to be acknowledged. Dreams, too, carried weight. The wakeful hours between first and second sleep were considered a liminal time, when the mind could receive what the day concealed. Hildegard of Bingen, writing in the 12th century, described night visions as gifts given in silence. In homes like Agnes's, these dreams weren't dismissed. They were retold, pondered, interpreted. A quiet moment at the hearth. Agnes stares into the embers, her thoughts visible on her face. The silence isn't blank, it's listening. Folk belief filled in the rest. Cats weren't just companions or pest control. They were guardians. A cat curled at the foot of the bed was thought to repel both vermin and invisible threats. Shadows danced on the wall. But where the cat slept, all was well. As one regional saying went, where the cat sleeps, demons keep out. Such sayings weren't decoration. They were tools for sense-making in the long dark. And in that darkness, stories did what light could not. They warmed, they instructed, they held the room together. Storytelling wasn't passive amusement. It was a survival strategy. Around the fire, elders repeated tales, not just to entertain, but to preserve memory. Gunnar, the village elder, speaks with slow precision. The fire lights his face. Children lean close, not out of boredom, but hunger, for meaning, for belonging. Story was insulation, a spoken thread linking each listener to something older. The fire circle was more than functional. It was therapeutic, a place where emotions could surface without being named. As Gunnar mimics a goblin's voice, one child laughs and another presses close to a sibling. Agnes sews, smiling faintly. These moments didn't erase hardship. They reframed it. Through shared breath and shared myth, the family lightened winter's weight. The hearth became a vessel for processing the season. One of Gunnar's favorite stories is about the Ice Maiden, a figure said to roam the forest edges during the harshest weeks. According to him, she doesn't hate warmth, only arrogance. Those who light fires too greedily, who hoard heat and mock the cold, she vises. She snuffs out flames with a breath, but the humble, those who respect winter's rules, she spares. To them, she leaves a single ember, tucked into the ash. It glows long after the fire dies. That ember, Gunnar insists, is why the village still wakes each spring. As he speaks, the room darkens except for the flame. The tale is not a warning, it's a blueprint. Respect the cold. Tend the ember. These tales shaped more than evenings. They shaped identity. They taught children not just how to survive, but who they were. A child, later that night, whispers the Ice Maiden's tale to a younger sibling, not word for word, but close enough. The warmth of fire spreads in layers. Physical, emotional, cultural. Each layer protects something. In this world, where heat was scarce, meaning became a form of warmth. Silence held structure. Stories held memory. Belief held space. Winter tested bodies, but it also refined minds. Agnes sits quietly, staring into the coals. The light matches her breathing, not hurried, not idle, present. In the stillness, in the myth, in the soft circle of firelight, she and her family find what the season demands, and what it offers. Even in deepest winter, they knew. Warmth is not always a thing you touch. The sensory world of a medieval winter was dense with texture, smell, and rhythm. And those elements weren't incidental. They shaped well-being in ways modern science is only beginning to understand. The hearth released more than heat. Smoked herbs like mugwort and rosemary scented the air, easing breathing and masking damp odors from livestock and humans living in tight quarters. Wool blankets, often scratchy and patched, still held body heat in a way no synthetic could. bare feet pressed against straw in the early morning, sensing cold directly from the earth. Every texture mattered: linen for its sweat-wicking function, fur for warmth, and worn wood for its insulating dryness. Sensory feedback was constant, tactile, and grounding. This material environment did more than comfort. It helped regulate the body's internal systems. Sleep, in particular, followed a rhythm that mapped closely to natural biology. The two-part sleep pattern common in pre-industrial Europe. First sleep and second sleep mirrors known cycles of melatonin release. Without artificial light, the pineal gland responds directly to sunset, producing a first wave of drowsiness. After 4 or 5 hours, many people wake naturally for a short interval before a second, lighter sleep resumes. It wasn't seen as disordered. It was expected. Within this quiet interlude, often called the watch, people engaged in low-stimulation activities, reflection, quiet conversation. These were not distractions. They were rituals that cued the nervous system toward rest. Drinking weak ale or infusions made from valerian root and chamomile added further calm. These weren't treatments. They were habit. And that habit regulated both sleep and stress. Recent studies confirm what these communities lived. The segmented sleep model is now acknowledged by sleep researchers as a likely pre-modern norm, supported by diary entries, court records, and medical writings. In lab conditions without artificial light, test subjects often fall into the same two-stage sleep. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, drops more effectively when sleep occurs in shared spaces, particularly among familiar people. What medieval families practiced by necessity, modern science recognizes as beneficial. Their daily routines reinforced this stability. Repetition mattered. Waking, eating, and working in reliable patterns gave structure to long, unpredictable winters. The diet followed suit. Foods like garlic, onion, and fermented cabbage weren't just shelf-stable, they supported immunity and digestion. Winter didn't eliminate freshness, it redefined it. Preserved foods were often nutrient and bacteria-rich, in ways that supported gut health, which we now know plays a role in mental well-being. Spiritual routines further reinforced emotional equilibrium. Daily rosaries, chants, and seasonal prayers weren't abstract expressions of belief. They were practical tools for mental regulation. Repetition of sound, breath, and rhythm engaged the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering heart rate and promoting calm. A monk's chant in a cold chapel and a mother's whispered prayer at the hearth served parallel functions to anchor the self in a time of external instability. The act of living closely with others also produced a physiological buffer against stress. Communal sleep lowered the body's fight-or-flight response. Proximity meant warmth, but also safety. Hearing the breathing of others, sharing physical space, and participating in common rhythms, these all sent clear signals to the brain. You are not alone. Even if comfort was minimal, connection was continuous. The chores of daily life contributed as well. Tasks like hauling water barefoot or kneading bread against a wooden board weren't exercises in hardship. They activated the body in ways modern wellness practices now try to replicate. Today's grounding exercises, walking barefoot, contact with natural surfaces, echo what peasants did as a matter of course. That contact with the cold ground wasn't abstract. It reset the body's internal systems through direct stimulation. The winter world Agnes lived in, for all its material scarcity, offered a framework of consistency. Light, sound, food, sleep, and prayer followed a predictable arc. That predictability offered security. a kind of physiological and emotional insulation against the unknown. The flicker of fire each night was not just heat, it was pattern, stability, a known variable in an uncertain world. This isn't to romanticize hardship. The risks were real: illness, scarcity, and isolation. But within those risks, people embedded practices that didn't just respond to need, they built well-being. The textures they touched, the food they shared, the rhythms they kept, all formed a web of sensory and behavioral cues that held the nervous system in balance. The body listens. Even when the mind doesn't articulate, it responds to wool, to heat, to routine, to prayer. It recognizes safety not only in comfort, but in pattern. And for medieval families like Agnes's, those patterns, tactile, spiritual, biological, were the hidden mechanisms that helped them not just survive winter, but move through it with steadiness. In our world, we search for wellness through devices, therapies, and individualized plans, but they lived it in repetition, in shared spaces, in the unspoken intelligence of habit. A bowl of broth at the same time each day, a cat curled by the feet, a breath of rosemary smoke in the rafters. These were not conveniences, they were anchors, and in that anchoring there was health, not perfect, but human, achieved not by controlling nature, but by listening to it and folding its rhythm into daily life. In the medieval world, warmth wasn't bought. It was built, slowly, over time, through fire tended daily, wool layered deliberately, meals cooked from memory, and prayers whispered into the quiet. Agnes didn't have a thermostat. She had rhythm. Her home warmed not from a single device, but from overlapping rituals. The glow of the hearth, the press of sleeping bodies, the steady motion of familiar tasks. Today, we chase that same warmth through products. Electric fireplaces, heated mattress pads, smart thermostats, and streaming subscriptions promise instant comfort. But something feels missing. We accumulate heat, but we rarely feel held by it. Agnes's world was dim, slow, and shared. The dimness wasn't dull. It created focus, fewer distractions, softer transitions. The slowness wasn't inefficiency. It was deliberate pace, synchronized with daylight and seasons. And the sharing wasn't optional. It was structural. Meals eaten together, silence kept together, sleep spent shoulder to shoulder. There was less privacy, but more presence. A candlelit table, a spindle in motion, a quiet smile exchanged over a steaming bowl. These were not interruptions to life. They were the rhythm of it. Our world is brighter, faster, and more isolating. Lights stay on through the night. Rooms glow blue from televisions and phones. Each person has their own space, their own screen, their own schedule. Friction has been engineered out. Doors glide shut. Deliveries arrive in hours. Communication is instant, but ease came at a cost. The texture of togetherness wore thin. Moments that once had weight, lighting a fire, sharing a task, are replaced with automation. In solving discomfort, we introduced a different kind of cold. Maybe it's not that we're broken. Maybe it's that we've been severed, cut off from the patterns that grounded our ancestors. The cycles of work and rest, of silence and song, of light and dark. We call it burnout, or anxiety, or seasonal dread. But it might just be the body mourning something it can't name. As the camera lingers on a man staring out a window lit by city lights, we return briefly to Agnes, her family breathing in sync, her hands resting near the fire. This isn't nostalgia. It's recognition, a reminder that warmth is not a commodity. It's a rhythm. Technology gave us power, over time, over temperature, over space, but it robbed us of ritual. In medieval life, repetition wasn't mindless. It was anchoring, a rosary bead moving thumb to finger, a log turned just so, a story told for the 100th time and still listened to. Without that friction, meaning slips away. Philosopher Ivan Illich once noted that ritual is not what slows us down. It is what lets us be in time, rather than just passing through it. Comfort without community breeds coldness. A warm room doesn't warm a lonely heart. Today, we eat alone in front of glowing screens, meals timed to algorithms, not conversations. But in Agnes's cottage, a stew was shared, not because it was efficient, because it was human. Warmth wasn't just around them, it was between them. Heat was shared through closeness, not convenience. I used to dread winter. The dark, the stillness, the long nights. It felt like a problem to solve, something to distract myself from, or speed through. But then I learned about Agnes and Martin, and the world they built inside the cold, a world of repetition and relationship, where every gesture, spinning wool, ladling stew, banking a fire, was both survival and ceremony. And slowly, I started to see winter differently. I stopped trying to push it away. I met it the way they did, one ember at a time. So now, when the nights stretch long, I don't turn every light on. I light one candle. I steep herbs. I can name, I say less, and listen more. These aren't hacks. They're memory. Something older than convenience. Something slower, quieter, closer. Rituals that remind the body it's safe, and remind the heart it belongs. We don't need to return to their world, but we can recover their rhythm. Reclaim small warmths, the smell of rosemary and steam, the hush of a shared room, the texture of a wool blanket passed down. We can slow, not in defeat, but in remembering. That warmth, real warmth, was never about control. It was about connection. And it's still here, waiting. The fire glows in the same stone hearth, but now it holds something more. The room hasn't changed. The same beams, the same straw-stuffed bedding, the same wind whispering against the shutters, but the silence feels different. Not empty, full. The embers crackle gently, casting light across Agnes's face. Her features are still, her body relaxed, but her presence is attentive. The wood pops once, soft and deep. Outside, the frost remains, but it no longer defines the scene. Inside, the glow is enough. Martin sleeps just beyond the firelight. His shoulders rise and fall in a rhythm no longer strained. His hands, red and worn from work, rest open. A child murmurs, shifting under the covers. Steam curls from a sleeping breath. The room is cold by modern standards, but no one inside is suffering. It holds them. Agnes watches the coals, not anxiously, not as a task, but as a ritual. Her hands are folded in her lap. She isn't adjusting anything. She's just watching, keeping presence. The fire is not something she controls. It's something she tends. Its rhythm guides earth. It has burned every night this season, and it will burn again tomorrow. They didn't fight the cold, they befriended it. Now, the fire means more than heat. It is care, passed down as routine. It is the sum of habits, the stored knowledge of how to live with winter rather than against it. The mittens drying near the hearth, the thread coiled on the spindle, the cat curled at the children's feet, all speak to a system built from relationship, not resistance. This warmth was not given. It was made, maintained, and shared. As the camera pulls back, the details remain. Flicker of firelight, hum of breath, the faint creak of wood. But now, the viewer sees what was always there. This wasn't a story of hardship. It was a record of rhythm. Slow, repetitive, deeply human. In their stillness, we find our story. Not one to copy, but one to remember. That warmth doesn't begin with what we buy, but how we live. That rhythm matters. That tending something slowly, together, has always been enough. In their stillness, we find our story.